I'm Kelsey K. Love. Welcome back to Travelin Fools. If you're new here, and even if you're not, Peter and I moved from Los Angeles to Europe 11 months ago, so I thought it was high time we give you all the lowdown on long-term travel in the place we've spent the most amount of time in Europe so far. Enter Albania. Now, Albania is currently growing at a rapid rate in terms of tourism, much like Croatia a few years back, and there's definitely some quirks you're going to want to know about if you plan to travel here or live here for any length of time. So what's up with Albania? Why do people come here? Why did we come here? Why might you want to come here? First, I've already covered this in part 2 of our series on how to stay in Europe longer than 90 days. But most importantly, if you have a US passport and are a US passport holder, as of 2024, Albania will automatically grant you a 1-year stay on arrival, visa-free, without any sort of specialized application process. You show up, they scan your passport, boom, done! You're in Albania and your 1 year has begun. 364 days later, you need to leave Albania for at least 90 consecutive days, and then you can return and be granted yet another 1-year stay visa-free on arrival. Sweet. So when we decided to move to Europe, as opposed to applying for one of the many available digital nomad visas, often which have requirements that we cannot or do not want to meet, and also come with a confusing amount of paperwork and processing time, Peter and I thought of Albania much like a Floridian warehouse called Guns and Stuff when it encounters a white dude with potential rage issues. Open for business! Outside of Albania's generous travel allowance, it also happens to rule in several important ways. There's an amazing coastline called the Albanian Riviera that happens to have a million beautiful pebbly beaches and nice swimming spots. The Albanian people are very generous and very kind. They happen to have some of our favorite food in Europe. There are mountains and lakes and charming towns and cities. And yes, while it is getting more expensive, especially in the summer months, it is still largely an affordable destination. Whether you plan to stay in Albania for a year, a month, or a week, here's a heads up of what you can expect when you arrive. First, let's talk about getting to Albania. As of 2024, there's only one international airport just outside the capital city of Tirana. There are very inexpensive flights here from countries like Italy and Greece, and also direct flights from places like France, Germany, Switzerland, Turkey, the Netherlands, and so on and so forth. If you're flying out of the country through Tirana Airport, especially on a low-cost airline like Wizz Air, you almost always need to print your boarding pass before you arrive at the airport. Albania has many things, but technologically advanced in exchange for a 29-euro flight ain't one of them. A second international airport is set to open in the summer of 2025 in Vlora, a city about 2 hours south of Tirana and directly on the coast, which should make travel to especially the southern parts of the country where the nicest beaches are much more efficient. You can also take overnight ferries to Albania from Italy. However, having a personal appreciation for communication, sanitation, organization, timeliness, and also sleep, this is not an experience I can recommend or will repeat. You've been warned. There are also plenty of direct buses to Albania from neighboring countries like Montenegro, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. Second, let's chat travel within Albania. Despite what Google or Apple Maps may tell you, passenger trains are very few and far between in Albania. Your best and often only bet are to travel by bus, private taxi, or rental car. If you're planning to take a bus from one town to another within Albania, which we've done successfully now several times, you should in fact know that if you're able to A, find the correct bus schedule, B, pinpoint the actual pickup and drop-off locations, and C, reserve and purchase your ticket on the interwebs before the actual day of travel, you are in the top 3% of successful Albanian tourists, and you should celebrate with a well-earned bus beer. For whatever reason, the details of activities like taking public transportation are often kept secret in a game called What's Happening, and is that my sweat or yours? Best of luck. As a cost baseline, I recently took a very long 6-hour bus ride from the capital city of Tirana down here to the south in Saranda, and it cost about 1,500 lek, or about 15 euros, and I was charged a small fee on top of that for failing to print my bus ticket before time. Worth it. I recommend joining a few Albanian expat groups in the land where unfortunate opinions go to flourish, Facebook, and ask an audience of seasoned, sometimes salty, expats and locals on clarifications around bus times, routes, and pickup and drop-off locations. If you're simply fresh out of patience for all of that, there's approximately 400 dudes in any given town on any given day who will gladly pick you up directly from your accommodation and drop you off at your destination for a set amount of money. Again, as a baseline, Peter and I took a 2-hour private taxi from Vlora to Tirana for 5,000 lek, or around 50 euros. You can find private drivers in the aforementioned Facebook groups or just by Googling local taxi companies in whatever city you happen to be in at the moment. Most will communicate via WhatsApp, so make sure you have this app downloaded before you start requesting any rides. If you're looking for slightly more freedom and absolutely more adventure, rental cars in Albania are affordable and also plentiful, though beware that drivers here are very impatient and can and will pass you in even the sketchiest of spots. Let them. As far as rental cars, and this goes for all of Europe, my recommendation is to use a site called Discover Cars and only choose suppliers with a rating of very good or exceptional, which you can filter for on the website or in the app. I also had no problem finding an automatic rental, which is rarely the case in the rest of Europe. Make sure you review the rental conditions section and add full coverage so that in the off chance that something unfortunate does happen along your journey, your decision to rent a car in Albania will not be the one that haunts you until the end of time. Albania was actually the first country I drove in Europe, and maybe it's coming off of 4 years of driving in Los Angeles, but I had a great experience. The roads here are mostly in good condition and well-traveled, but just keep in mind there are very few rules here when it comes to driving. Lanes are more of an artistic suggestion, so keep your eyes peeled and your head on a well-oiled swivel. Now that we've chatted planes, no trains, and automobiles, let's get down to the day-to-day stuff. I'm talking sexy stuff, like preferred payment methods, the language and its potential to become a barrier, cellular data, and last but not least, Albania's favorite recipe, water and cigs. Let's start with the currency and payment methods. The currency in Albania is called the lek, and especially outside of Tirana, the majority of the country deals in cash. Restaurants, hotels, taxis, spas, dermatologists, dentists, the guy on the corner you buy tampons from, you name it. Cash rules all, baby. While it's a pleasant surprise when the vendor you're currently dealing with happens to take Visa or MasterCard, on the day-to-day, you should not expect people to take cards of any kind, of the debit or credit variety. If you live in the US, I highly recommend opening a bank account with Charles Schwab, who will kindly reimburse you for all of your foreign ATM fees. Moving on. As you may have guessed, in Albania, they speak a language called Albanian. I'm not gonna blow smoke up your butts. It's a difficult language. Learn your pleases and thank yous and yeses and nos and sirs and ma'ams, but outside of that, Google Translate works just fine. Most of the younger generation in Albania speak English real good. Speak English very well. But the older generation is more likely to speak Italian, Greek, or even Macedonian versus English. Next up, let's chat data. Data? Data. Whatever. Assuming your phone is unlocked and assuming you're spending more than a few days in Albania, my recommendation is to get a physical SIM card or an eSIM through Vodafone. They have physical stores all over the country, and for about 1,500 lek, or 15 euros, you can get 10 gigs of data, about 2,000 national minutes on a local phone number, and 2,000 text messages to use within 30 days. You can also top this up on the Vodafone app so that you don't have to go into the store every time you want to renew. If you're listening, Vodafone, you're welcome. It's useful to have a local phone number in Albania for several reasons. Getting food delivered, making appointments or reservations, talking to your accommodation hosts, and probably even booking tours. If you don't want to mess with getting this set up in person, or if you want to buy a package that works in places outside of Albania, my recommendation is to use a company called Nomad, which has been our go-to for most of Europe. In fact, my referral code is in the video description if you want a little discount on that first eSIM. And that's probably the douchiest thing I've said all year. Another day-to-day thing you'll encounter almost immediately, assuming you're half as thirsty as the general population, in a non-sexual way, is that you'll need to buy and drink only bottled water in Albania. While people have told us that the water is actually drinkable, but just tastes bad because of high levels of chlorine, all I know is that if I show up in a place and I look around and I see all the locals buying water and drinking water that they've bought, I'm gonna do the same thing. I've had Bali Belly and Montezuma's Revenge, and I'm just simply not trying to add Albania ass to that list. As far as food, especially outside of Albania, you won't find a ton of variety. Vlora has mostly Italian food, the south has mostly Greek food, and everywhere else has mostly the same menu as their neighbors. Luckily, this isn't a bad thing, as I personally think Albanian food is better than any of its Balkan neighbors, most of Northern Europe, and dare I say, even Portugal. Strong words, stronger taste buds. Call me when the Portuguese figure out sauces. And lastly, if your hair doesn't smell like tobacco and your hands aren't shaking from a caffeine high, were you ever really in Albania? Trust me when I say they're blowing endless darts out here, y'all. I thought Texas was bad. Then I thought Asia was bad. But never in my life have I seen literal children on a swing set smoke the Albanian equivalent of Marlboro Reds. I've seen kids smoking cigs with their parents. I've seen bus drivers smoking cigs while they're driving. I've seen a guy smoke a cig with his left hand while he's smoking a cig with his right hand. Dang all dang. Now, let's put the pack down, switch from day to month considerations for a minute. Yeah, when friends ask me about Albania, I almost always say that it reminds me more of being in Southeast Asia than it does the rest of Europe. There are many reasons for this, but the first one that comes to mind is that not everything in Albania is listed on Google or Apple Maps, and I consider that a good thing. As opposed to pre-planning every potential activity you can expect to find and do here, I find Albania's lack of dedication to the internet, correct hours, locations, and all, very rare, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately pretty charming. One of our favorite restaurants in Tirana, for example, is incredibly delicious, and for lunch for 2 people, costs about 500 lek, or about 5 euros. It does not exist on a map, there is no website, there are no reviews, and there's no one that works there except the solo dude who is your host, server, and chef. And I sincerely hope it stays that way. Some places in the world are better experienced on the fly. Albania happens to be one of them. Also on the Southeast Asia note, Albania has many stray dogs and cats. If you have a soft spot for animals and time to spare, there are several organizations all over the country that are always and forever looking for volunteers to foster pets, help with spay and neuter programs, and even volunteers to fly animals back to the United States, where their adopter is ready and waiting for you when you arrive. On a different note, and to reminisce for a minute, when Peter and I previously moved back to the United States after spending several years abroad, our landlord in Los Angeles asked us to write down every address of ours for the previous 5 years. Since our official address in Thailand could be summed up as up the hill with the duck restaurant and the light blue building on the 2nd floor, this did not go well. Similarly, Albania has a distinct lack of legitimate addresses and therefore a distinct lack of great methods to receive international or national packages. Again, this is where having a local phone number comes in handy. Whether you want to have a pizza delivered to your apartment or an important document delivered from a family member back home, chances are you're going to have to do the Gen Z nightmare of actually speaking to a human on the telephone. I know. So cringe. For international packages from the US, we have been successfully able to receive mail in Tirana by having a package sent through the US Postal Service to the Tirana post office, who then called us when it was time to pick up our package. Just ensure the paperwork is filled out correctly and your phone number is listed on both the shipping details and on the package itself. I will note that while we had a tracking number, it did stop tracking after Germany, so maybe just don't ship anything that's irreplaceable. As far as an Amazon equivalent, you're crap out of luck. Time to readopt the ancient practice of leaving your house to buy stuff that you probably don't need. Again, on a Southeast Asia vibe, there are pretty frequent power and water outages. We personally haven't had much of an issue with this, except for a 4-day no water, no fun stint one time in Tirana. But it can and will and does happen, and there's really no way to pre-plan for it or prevent it from happening. Now, back on the nature side of things. While both the Adriatic and Ionian seas are thankfully flat, and very nice for boating, swimming, and floating, there's no trash. Skip the scuba diving, buy yourself an inner tube, and float merrily alongside the micro and macro plastics. You should also note that especially down south in places like Samil and Saranda, where we currently are, it's not super easy to find free places to swim. The majority of beaches are paid and can range from 1,000 to 2,000 lek, or 10 to 20 euros for 2 chairs and kind of a crappy umbrella. Not a huge deal, but if you're here for months or weeks at a time and plan to swim the majority of those days, you're going to want to search around for a little bit for a place where you can take a righteous dunk without paying a cover charge. And lastly on this note, if you like fireworks for no reason at all, Albanians are here to deliver the goods. Compared to Los Angeles, however, where I'd frequently awake to the sounds of car alarms, car crashes, human screams, and my neighbor loudly faking orgasms, fireworks are usually the least of my concern. I'm realizing now that most of this list has the potential to come off negatively. And I don't want y'all to come away from this video with the same sense of doom you get from learning literally anything about Clarence Thomas. Albania is a wonderful place and a wonderful country with an immensely complicated recent history. If you're into food, culture, having conversations with friendly locals, coffee, cigarettes, swimming in the sea, and nature, you're in the right place. Even in a year, you won't run out of places to explore. And if you do, first of all, I don't believe you. And second of all, I don't want to travel with you. Sounds exhausting. Next time we'll talk more about where to base yourself in Albania and the process for renting an apartment here. But for now, as my millennial brethren like to say, keep it 100. Later.